in the spirit of reconciliation, I would like to acknowledge the custodians of the Darambil peoples where we're both sitting, and to pay our respects to those elders past, present and emerging, and a small Kiwi Marioho, Maritu, Mariora, Kia Tātou, Homia, Huie, Taike, which is a kind of a let's all bring our spirits together. And it kind of matches our topic, Karena, because we're going to be talking about yourself and your world of how you've got into policy making, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So just tell me, who are you?
Okay, so Karena Menzie-Ballantyne, extended surname because of getting married over the last few years. But yes, I'm based on the Bundaberg campus, and I've been here at CQU for about 10 years now, working in education, particularly in teacher education.
And you've told me your last 10 years, so how did you, what's this kind of life story? How did you end up there? What have you been doing?
Oh, goodness. The only constant is change. That's a bit of a motto in our family. I must admit, my undergraduate degree was in political science and history. So my first foray into a career was actually in public relations and government relations. And I worked in that area for, a number of years, a good decade or more. Then I married during that period, and to give you the total story, life took a bit of an unexpected turning, and found myself in a situation of coercive control and domestic violence, which took the career off track for a number of years. But the result of that was two gorgeous boys. So I then stayed in that career, moving up to Queensland, but it was not working for me as a single parent. And I was looking and looking, what is the thing that really I have a passion about, that I'm interested in? And at that time, there was a course running for a Bachelor of Education Middle Years. And I thought that was something very different, that I could actually focus on adolescence, which is a fascinating area for me. So that's how I came into education. And so I was working in middle years of schooling, particularly in the humanities and social sciences.
So what do you think, it's obviously a passion project, working with the next generation. How do you think this space has changed over the years, becoming a teacher? I mean, it gets quite a bad rap. You know.
Oh, absolutely it does.
Would you agree with that?
It gets a terrible rap. And I mean, to the degree that I send practicum teachers out there to have their mentors say, why are you doing this? Why are you coming into this field? And I think part of that, and this is where my adolescence focus comes into play, is that we start looking at things from a deficit model, from what these kids don't have, what they don't do, what they don't achieve, instead of turning it around and going, well, they're a different generation. They have enormous potential. They have really interesting perspectives. And if we can take it from that more positive model, I find that I can engage with students that sometimes people see as problematic.
So it sounds to me, when you're talking, you sound very much like a teacher and your time in the classroom, that you would be learning as much from them as they're learning from you. Is that a fair assessment?
All the time.
Do you have some good examples of what you've learnt from kids up the years?
Oh my goodness. I mean, obviously technology is the one that jumps into your mind mostly. But I think one of the things that I've really learned from this generation is openness. I think they are far more open than we ever were. And ways of including have changed. So, we were talking just prior to filming this about social media and the way that they use that to include people in conversations. So I think they're the things that never get reported.
Very interesting, very interesting. Do you think you've worked in that middle years age, which is that kind of, they're not quite children and they're not quite adults. There's a phrase that I remember when I used to live in Norway called vesle voksen, which means little grown-ups.
Yes.
Do you feel sometimes that we tend to treat that middle years as if they are in this kind of in-between phase, or are they little grown-ups? Give some advice.
Absolutely. And I think if I can veer into my area of expertise in terms of citizenship, One of our researchers calls it citizens in waiting. We treat them as citizens in waiting instead of acknowledging the fact that they're citizens now. They're people with their own perspectives, their cultural backgrounds, all of the things they bring into the classroom, which is so rich. And by adolescence, yes, they're not fully grown. The frontal cortex isn't fully developed. They will make irrational decisions on occasion. But if we go back to things like the UN Charter on the Rights of a Child, it says that they should have a say in things that matter to them in an age-appropriate way. And I think that's what we forget to do with adolescents. We forget to listen because they're not citizens in waiting. They have things to say. It's not always going to be informed, but it's important.
The other thing that people often talk about now with adolescents is that and that technology space, that they're not getting exposed to, let's call it, rich culture, long words, reading books. Do you share that concern?
I mean, as a bibliophile, the old physical book is not to be denied. But I think we have to face the fact that the world is changing. I was having a conversation just the other day with somebody who was saying, my children are already using an iPad, they will never be able to write. You know, and we used to, when I first arrived at CQU, our dean at the time, Helen Huntley, was still judging the handwriting competition. And that's within a decade. It's like, do we need a handwriting competition now? So I think there's a balance between, you know, again, applying a deficit model, saying that they're not doing these things, and looking at the world they're going to graduate into and say, well, do they actually need to be doing some of these things anymore? In terms of the richness, they have exposure to things I never did. You know, my generation didn't have exposure to the, I mean, that, and we acknowledge both the good and bad of it, but the information sources that they can access is enormous.
So you wouldn't share the concerns, or I suppose I'm asking the expert here about, do you feel they're not getting the right literacy training? I mean, we have this thing called the literacy wars about how to teach literacy. I mean, I know that's often about the younger kids, but do you feel that there is a danger that people aren't becoming as literate as we would like them to be?
Well, I think there's a definitional thing around literacy there. I mean, absolutely the fundamentals of literacy and numeracy, you cannot engage with the world without it. But I think the literacy wars comes back to the pedagogies of literacy. And one of my absolute bugbears is the either-or mentality. And we find this quite often with things like global citizenship, global competence, that the school says, oh, but my school's low literacy school, so we have to concentrate on that. As if that's the only thing that's going to get the children forward in the world. And I often feel we're replicating cycles of poverty, cycles of in education, because we say those low SES schools, those low performing schools, we have to concentrate on literacy and numeracy, and we don't have time to do these other critical thinking, global competence type things. And I think we're doing those children a disservice.
You know, I'm looking forward to our next conversation where we're going to dig more deeply into this whole idea about what is global citizenship. Thank you.